Hey all, so we're back with another Spotlight with Context, and today we are talking about the High Evolutionary. So just to touch on one thing from his stats, his prestige is really freaking high. We have a new prestige king. If that matters to you, pay extra attention to the rest of this video. If it doesn't, then don't. But moving right into the champion attributes, starting with a survivability score of 3.5, this character has auto block to protect themselves. They have access to a bunch of debuffs for inequity. You don't really need anything other than those two to make life better. But yeah, generally a bit tanky. Damage of 3.5. It's definitely possible to do some really solid damage with this character when you line things up and put the pieces for their damage rotation in the right place. But they are not really built as a nuke. That's not their function. It's more of a control character. And as we'll get to, a lot of the power eggs were put in the defender basket, so to speak. So that's not really the function here. Ease of use 2 might honestly be underselling it because this character isn't that difficult to use. But as we go through the kit, I think you'll definitely see where the 2 is coming from, because there's an element of Beta Ray Bill in this kit, same designer, where you want things to expire under certain conditions, and that is, one more thing you have to track. There is also a spatial component to this kit where there is a field on the battlefield that you have to keep in mind and you want to stay within it. And so when you combine those two things together, the bandwidth ask is significant and you can understand why there's a low ease of use. Utility of 3.5, a lot of different little pieces of utility here, but not intentionally a monster, right? Like he doesn't have everything, he just has some really good targeted pieces. And then defender strength of 5. He's really annoying to fight, right? Combo detonation is difficult to deal with. He has severe debuffs that you can't get off you. In PvP context, you're going to have to deal with inequity. And then there's that auto block, right? It is frustrating to fight through him quickly. And then if you try and fight him too quickly and push him to his special 2, well, then add reverse controls to the mix. He's pretty tough, not gonna lie. So getting into the abilities, we start off with the always active section. The High Evolutionary is immune to buffs granted by the opponent and immune to any neutralize and rupture effects. So this is a pretty unique take on buff immunity. What this means is he's not immune to the dexterity buff, right? He's not immune to buffs that are added from nodes. He actually can use buff cornucopia in incursions, right? Because those buffs are not granted by the opponent. But he is immune to Kushala's ignition buffs. He is immune to Mojo's hater buffs. He is immune to Nico's Pinnacle buffs. Although that last one is not great for him. But you get what I mean, right? Like it's an interesting distinction, but it can work both in his favor and against. And then immune to neutralize and rupture. There are characters that are effectively immune to neutralize, but outright immunity to it is still pretty rare. I think this is maybe the second character after Photon. And then rupture immunity is very rare, helpful here. So the High Evolutionary's combat power rate can only be reduced by skill champions. So skill champions who have access to suppression or, unnamed effects like Lumitrix work here, but you can't use a tech character to avoid his specials, such as Future Ant-Man or Punisher 2099. While the opponent is suffering from a personal debuff, they lose and cannot gain Undermine or True Sense effects. So we mentioned there's an auto block coming later. You can bypass that auto block with True Strike or True Accuracy, but not with Undermine or True Sense, because keeping a personal debuff off yourself is going to be effectively impossible for characters that have access to those abilities. When blocked or when blocking an attack, He has a 25% chance to inflict a 10% severe wither debuff for 15 seconds. This is a 100% chance on well-timed blocks and on auto blocks, and stacks up to 10. So at 10 stacks, as a reminder for what wither does, at 10 stacks, that is a 100% reduction to the opponent's ability power rate, which means it just zeroes out most sources of power that aren't from actual hits landing. And then lastly here, basic hits have a 25% chance to inflict an exhaustion debuff for 15 seconds, which stacks up to 10. So that's really helpful against mainly Sasquatch, but also just feeds the rest of his abilities, right? And this is what I meant when I said it's basically impossible for characters without Neutralize or something similar to keep his debuffs off them. Because between the block trigger, which is also a hitting into block trigger, and the exhaustion trigger here on all basic hits, you're just probably going to have debuffs on you if you're fighting the High Evolutionary, and vice versa. So onto his Exoskeleton. This is the auto block section. When the High Evolutionary would be struck with the same basic attack twice in a row, he removes any stuns on him and gains a 100% auto block passive, lasting until he's attacked 3 more times. So that means that you can hit him, or you can hit his block. Both of those count as being attacked. But either way, that number is going to go down, and then after you've done that 3 times, the auto block will stop trying to trigger. The other thing to note here is that when he gains the auto block passive, he removes stuns on him. That does not mean he becomes stun immune while the auto block passive is up. You can technically parry him again and bypass the auto block that way. It just requires more blocks, which means more withers on you, which means more inequity and other problems. But I do want to call that out because that is a way to somewhat mitigate the auto block threat if you really can't hit his block. Once the auto block ends, it's disabled and cannot be gained again until the High Evolutionary is struck 18 times by basic attacks. So that's a pretty long cooldown, except as a defender, each personal debuff on the opponent when the auto block ends reduces this count by 1 down to a minimum of 5. So if you have 13 of the High Evolutionary's personal debuffs on you when you've cleared the auto block, it can come back in only a single combo. You have to be very careful with that. It's also important to note that multi-hit characters are going to burn through this faster, right? So that's kind of a double-edged sword. If you have a character with multi-hit basics, you are going to be able to clear the auto block passive faster, but you will also be recharging it faster. So keep that in mind. And then finally, this auto block does not count as a well-timed block, so you don't have to worry about being parried. It's dangerous in a lot of ways, but you don't have to worry about that stun. It resists block breaks from heavy attacks and cannot be prevented by ability accuracy reduction. So you can't just use somebody like Falcon or Crossbones to blitz through it. You need true accuracy, true strike, or some other answer for auto block that isn't Undermine or True Sense. Because those are, after all, cosmic answers for the most part, and the 2 I just named live more in skill. Now, I don't want to focus exclusively on him as a defender, so it is worth calling out. That auto block is really helpful on offense too, as long as you come to understand it. It can allow you to ramp your debuffs more quickly if you do get hit. It's just a really nice safety net. It just does have a meaningful cooldown when you use it because you don't get that reduction on offense because, frankly, we tried it and it would have been too good. But moving on to his combo detonation here. While combo detonation is not active when striking or when struck with basic attacks, he gains 1 combo detonation charge. When he would inflict a personal debuff, he gains 5 charges. So that's important there because that means that even when you deal with his debuffs, his exhaustions, and his withers, he can still gain combo detonation charges, right? So Tranquilize answers a lot. Tranquilize does not stop this, nor does debuff immunity if that's up. When the opponent gains a bar of power and High Evolutionary has 50 or more charges, then you consume 50 of those charges for a 150% chance to inflict a combo detonation passive for 18 seconds. Unblockable hits from non-skill champions do not count towards this combo detonation. So if you are using unblockable to bypass his auto block, you are going to have more trouble with the combo detonation because the better your uptime on your unblockable and the more useful it is against the auto block, the worse it is against this combo detonation. So that's just something to watch out for because that can be a real problem. As a defender, the damage scales with base attack only. So as a reminder, if you haven't dealt with combo detonation before, it exists on Cassie. What this means is that within the 18 seconds before it expires, you have to increase your combo by 16. You can do that with abilities that grant combo, you can do that by landing hits, doesn't really matter, but you have to go up by 16. And then of course, the primary threat of this combo detonation comes from the combination of it and the auto block, right? It's simple enough to hit the opponent a lot in a window for the most part. It is a lot harder if you have to play around something like the auto block, which effectively adds kind of a mixmaster element into the fight. Onto the evolutionary field, this shows up in the special 2 and 3. Like it says, if you bait only the special 1, against the defending High Evolutionary, that does mean that this won't happen, which is worth noting. But the Evolutionary Field is an area of effect placed in the stage by the High Evolutionary around the opponent for 12 seconds. The expiration rate decreases by 75% while either champion is inside it. So doing a bit of quick math there, that means that if for that full duration a champion is inside the field, it actually lasts 48 seconds, not 12 seconds, right? Because that's how you do expiration rate math. You take the reduction, subtract it from 1, and so that's telling you that the field is actually ticking down at 25%, and then you divide that duration of 12 seconds by 0.25, boom, you get 48. If you didn't follow that, don't worry about it, but it's just if you're trying to do any kind of precise math around expiration rate, that's how it works. When the opponent enters the field, they are inflicted with an indefinite devolve debuff, which stacks up to 10. So devolve is a new type that takes inspiration from the aspect of evolution node and decreases basically all the stats that node increases, but not ability accuracy. I want to get that out of the way up front. So attack, crit rating, block proficiency, a bunch of stuff is going to go down here. And so it is going to make your life worse, but it is not touching your ability accuracy. Because as we talked about a lot early in his design process, if it did decrease your ability accuracy even 1.6%, that would have a dramatic impact on the overall fight flow, right? So for anyone who is concerned by the clear parallels to aspect of evolution, don't worry, we didn't do that. While the opponent is inside the field, all personal debuffs are paused. Additionally, while suffering from a non-damaging debuff, the opponent's inflicted with a reverse controls passive. So if you can keep those non-damaging debuffs off you, then reverse controls doesn't trigger here, right? It's tough to do that because some of them are severe, but there is a pretty significant benefit to being able to, because if you can control the High Evolutionary's non-damaging debuffs, and thus not fear the reverse controls passive from the Evolutionary Field, then you can push them to Special 2 more, which means that you don't have to deal as much with the Special 1, which we'll get to in a little bit. And that generally makes it easier to deal with the combo detonation. Because we haven't talked about this yet, but I will bring it up here. The basic threat profile of the High Evolutionary is that the Special 2 puts the field on the floor, which brings reverse controls into play. And if you only bait Special 1, well, the Special 1 is a rather long animation, and so it becomes harder to answer the combo detonation. And so the answers you want to bring to the fight relate to the balance between those two, right? If you answer the debuffs better, if you answer the auto block better, and therefore you can answer the combo detonation better, or if you just gain a lot of combo, then you can bait the special one pretty easily. However, if you don't have those tools, if you can't deal with the combo detonation, then you probably want some other kind of answer, right? Like you probably want Tranquilize to keep those debuffs off yourself and push more towards the special 2. Or maybe you don't have debuff control, but you do have reverse controls immunity like Moondragon, right? There are ways to mitigate this, but you have to really understand the choice you're making, right? Are you bringing in a partial high evolutionary counter who wants to bait the special 1, or are you bringing in one that wants to bait the special 2? That's something that you want to know before the fight starts. So moving on for a little bit, while the high evolutionary is inside the field, all attacks deal a burst of 34% of the damage dealt as direct damage. So similar to trauma and overload, but specifically direct damage. And then while either champion is inside the field, during the high evolutionary's special 1, he gains extra attack rating and the potency of his combo detonation increases by 4.5% per debuff on the opponent, up to a maximum of 25 debuffs. So that is more of an attacker thing. You want to keep the opponent in the field because then your special 1 and your combo detonation do more damage. But you might need to be aware of this on defense, especially if you get hit by the special 1 because of the reverse controls. So for all special attacks, while the opponent is inside the evolutionary field, they are not pushed back when struck by special hits, and are passively slowed for the duration of the special attack. So he keeps you in the field and can wail on you even if you go unstoppable, right? The special 1, we already talked about how this animation is relatively long. On activation, it also inflicts 5 personal wither debuffs. So if you're trying to control how many debuffs you have on you, you're going to want access to Tranquilize at the start of this special, or it's going to be tough to get them off. Endurance is another thing that can be very helpful against the high evolutionary, to call that out. I've been focusing a little bit too much on Tranquilize thus far, but these debuffs don't resist duration reduction. So if you have high access to endurance, you can absolutely keep the number of things on you lower because of that. You just probably won't be able to keep it at 0. And then as an attacker, the final hit of the special 1 immediately expires the high evolutionary's combo detonation. But if it expires naturally during the special, while the opponent is inside the field, it re-inflicts itself when the special ends. So if you combine this with the last bullet of the high evolutionary field before, this is a somewhat complicated loop. But basically what this is telling you is, remember, your combo detonation is stronger while you're in the field. You gain extra attack during your special 1 while you're in the field. And this is telling you that you want the combo detonation to naturally expire on the opponent while you're in the field. It will deal more damage because your attack is being improved, and then it will be re-inflicted with that extra potency because of the bonus in the evolutionary field itself. And the key part for why this is a really good damage payoff is that you're getting a free combo detonation backup, right? You are cashing in on the damage, and then you don't have to deal with combo detonation charges and the opponent gaining a bar of power and to re-inflict it and then line things up properly. You're getting rewarded for threading the needle on the way with just, boom, you get the damage during the special 1, and it comes back after the special 1. So this is kind of the key skill ask of the high evolutionary. You want to get the field up, and you want to have the combo detonation expire naturally during the special 1. That's why I said earlier that this character has some elements of Beta Ray Bill in them. That's the kind of thing you have to watch. So for the special 2, 0.7 seconds after activation, place the evolutionary field. And if that reads weird to you, that is actually intended to be mercy, right? Because if the evolutionary field was placed immediately on activation, then that would mean if you had a debuff on you, which remember you usually do, your controls would instantly be reversed on activation. And because the first hit of the Special 2 is a full field beam, that would be really difficult to deal with. So what this is telling you is that you can dex the first hit of the Special 2 normally, and then pay attention to the reverse controls that probably just happened. That's the only reason for that 0.7-second delay. It also lines up nicely with the animations, but the primary purpose here is actually to make that more manageable. So if you do push him to the Special 2, it's important to not panic. Know that you can get out of the way of the beam and then flip that switch in your brain. And then second here, if the personal auto block is disabled due to activation, it becomes enabled. So no matter how many hits have been landed by either character, Special 2 gives the high evo back his auto block. So on defense, that can be annoying, but may or may not have a huge impact on the fight. But this is really nice for the attacker where there's no way to shorten that cooldown on the auto block, and so this just gives it back to you right away if you need the safety net. For Special 3, on activation, this inflicts 5 personal severe wither debuffs, same as the Special 1, and places the evolutionary field. So it's kind of both of them at the same time. That's what you're getting for your 3 bars. Moving on to the signature ability, at the end of a fight against the High Evolutionary, each debuff on the opponent becomes a cross-fight devolve debuff. So all debuffs turn into these devolves. These cross-fights then carry over to the next 3 fights and can stack up to 10. So even if you nuke the High Evolutionary down in Alliance War, you have to watch out for the fact that your attack, crit damage, crit rating, block proficiency, etc. are going to be that much worse for the next 3 fights. That's something that you can work around, but yeah, you gotta be careful with this. Obviously, no impact in Battlegrounds, but definitely a dangerous defender in war early on in a path. Next up, for each debuff on the opponent, High Evolutionary reduces their regeneration rate by 20% up to a maximum of 100%. This effect replaces the Despair Mastery, and it is also granted to the opponent of a champion suffering from the Crossfight Devolve debuff. So this is kind of complicated, but the important thing here is that this basically eliminates the delta between how the High Evolutionary feels when he has access to Despair and when he doesn't, right? It's very similar to how Kushala's signature ability works. That's actually like what the coding was borrowed from a little bit. But this is just basically telling you that the High Evolutionary has Despair plus at all times. It only goes up to 100%, as with Despair, but regardless of where you run into him, his debuffs are going to hit your regeneration rate. So that doesn't matter if you're using a character that resists regen rate reduction. There's a bunch of that in Mutant and a little bit in Skill. But it's worth calling out because for anyone else, especially if there's anything else in the fight that might reduce your regen rate further, that can be a problem. But then the real kicker here is that this is also granted by that crossfight, right? And so if you fight the High Evolutionary, get these crossfight devolves on you, and then go into another fight against somebody else who is reducing your regen rate actively, then that's going to stack with this Super Despair, and you might be in trouble. Now, most of the places where that would happen, because we're basically talking about Alliance War, your opponents are probably running Max Despair anyway. So it's not quite as dramatic as it sounds, but it means that it's going to be there, and it's going to be a bit stronger than normal. Because remember, the tuning on Max Despair is 16%, or no, sorry, 15% per debuff, and this is 20%. Next bullet, the potency of the bursts of damage granting by the evolutionary field are increased by 100%. That's obviously a bullet that scales with SIG level, so this just is telling you As the High Evolutionary gets higher Sig, he's dealing more damage. Which is generally a nice thing to have because, as a reminder, also a prestige character is probably going to want Sigs in general. And then lastly, when inflicting a Devolve debuff, which remember happens while the Evolutionary Field is up, the High Evolutionary has a 100% chance to gain an indefinite Aspect of Evolution passive. So this is all of the same things that Devolve lowers, except benefiting the High Evolutionary. So crit rate, crit damage, attack, all those things go up. This one also increases ability accuracy, because the intent was to borrow from that Aspect of Evolution node as much as possible, and ability accuracy on the High Evolutionary we decided was a lot less dangerous than hurting the opponent's ability accuracy. So it does live here. And with that, before we get into synergies, let's take a look at the summaries here. So as an attacker, you want to well-time block often so that you get the access to the combo detonation faster because you're inflicting more of your debuffs, right? That's the link there. You want to use your special 2, most likely, maybe the special 3, to get the evolutionary field up. You want to keep the opponent or the high evolutionary inside the field as much as possible. And when combo detonation is close to expiring on its own, you want to throw a special 1 while the opponent is in the field. Then as long as that field stays active, which will be very long if you keep either yourself or them inside it, just keep spamming special 1 to maximize your combo detonation damage. That's the attacker kit in a relatively large nutshell. Now, defender summary, it's important to know the immunities, so can't use neutralize, rupture, can't grant buffs to him. The same basic attack twice in a row grants him an auto block passive. He inflicts severe wither when he is well-timed block, so if you are parrying him to try and get around the auto block, you're going to hit debuffs on yourself. And then those debuffs are contributing towards combo detonation. So you have to manage combo detonation and auto block at the same time. The special 1 takes up a lot of time, and the special 2 places an evolutionary field on the arena, which throws more debuffs on you and potentially reverses your controls. So that is a pretty significant suite of threats, but I really want to underline again, for a lot of fights, you're going to be focusing on the interaction between combo detonation and auto block. Keep that at the forefront of your mind while you're evaluating the rest of the threats. So moving on to the synergies. First up, Forced Mutation with Scarlet Witch Sigil and Quicksilver. Fun fact, this synergy functions even if you think that this was a dumb editorial decision in the comics. For High Evolutionary, at the start of each fight, inflict 5 Devolve debuffs, so you get them for free. Scarlet Witch gains 3 instability, so just ramp for both of them, right? And then for Quicksilver, personal trauma potency is increased by 15%, so you deal more red numbers, kind of what Quicksilver is good at. It's also important to note that this trauma potency increase does apply to the bonus that Quicksilver gets for his whiplash damage from his personal trauma. It was coded to account for that. I Made You with Rocket Raccoon. For the High Evolutionary, when the opponent activates a special attack inside the field, all personal severe wither debuffs on them are refreshed. So get a nice little reference to some leader gameplay there. And then for Rocket Raccoon, at the start of each fight, gain 25 scrap metal, so you just have more of your ramp and more of your tools right away. Spider Experiment with Spider Woman. For the High Evolutionary, personal wither potency is increased by 25%. Note that this is not flat, so it means those 10% withers become 12.5% withers, but that does mean that the total potency goes from 100% to 125%, which means you do have access to power reversal. And then for Spider-Woman, power stings last 25% longer, so it's easier to make them pop. Orphaned with Adam Warlock, for the High Evolutionary, personal reverse controls passive is replaced by a 25% special concussion passive, which is nice because reverse controls doesn't really matter on offense, and this replaces it with something that is useful on offense. And for Adam Warlock, the special 1 stun cannot have its duration reduced. Yay! Real Girl with Viv Vision, High Evolutionary gains critical rating and critical damage rating, and Viv gains a bunch of block proficiency. Also, yay. And then we have a generic Enemies with Viv Vision where all champions on the team, named or not, gain critical rating. And that is the High Evolutionary. It's a really cool character. There's a lot going on. It's definitely a significant defender puzzle to figure out. There are some decent answers, but yeah, it's 5 out of 5 for a reason. I think it's a cool kit though. It's pretty fun to play. Like I said, there's some commonalities to Beta Ray Bill, some commonalities to Leader. I enjoy those characters, so it's interesting to me. But let me know what you're thinking in the comments. And until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.